Hey everyone, I'm Chris Diaz. I'm happy to be here. I'm a platform engineer at Red Ventures. I've been here about 2 years. And I kind of want to dwell on my time at Red Ventures to tell a story about how documentation can be super powerful. And really highlight why it can be an underdog and something you can use to get quick value. So, thinking back 2 years when I joined the organization, I joined a centralized ops team. And I think largely we know that this isn't best practice nowadays, but that's how we were. And day to day, we helped about 25 or so independent development teams, which equated to around 600 to 700 developers, really just get their code into production and manage the infrastructure that was powering it. But the firefighting came into play, and we were the go-to people to manage everything. And so obviously we were the bottleneck. We can't prioritize across 30 different business teams. We don't know what's pressing. We have our own internal things that we want to get done. And so coming into work every day was a lot like this. You open up your laptop, you get on Slack, and you're like, oh man, we got 3 fires going on, we got some daily work. How are we ever going to get this done? And so as our business grew, so did our team, and we were hiring platform engineers, and the process kind of looked like this. We were like, Terraform everything, run everything in a container. We hate Jenkins. We have a ton of Jenkins. We're in the cloud. We're also on-prem. Oh, yeah, and then if you see something that's not documented, just document it. And so when that engineer got into an actual task, Bob needs an API. How should I deploy it for him? It looked a lot like this. Go talk to this team member. Do they have this requirement? Wait, we're building a new process, so maybe you could use that, but maybe use the old one. I don't know. And so let's say they're like, I'm going to choose that one. Where's the documentation? How do I get started? We had documentation. We just couldn't find it. And so we did a lot of okay, now go re-ask that person. They're going to look in their notes. They're going to send you 4 documentation links. One of them is going to be wrong. And it was really just frustrating for the engineer onboarding, which then outlays to the engineer who just needs to get their code into production. So through this all, we're like, all right, we're gonna just self-service this, and developers will just do everything. And I think, we made a lot of independent pieces to getting to that goal, but we weren't connecting the dots. So, a developer is still having a very cumbersome experience. Maybe they have X, Y, and Z, but they can't put them all together, and, their app needs to function together. And it's kind of bad to say, but we were just used to this. And we were still building these isolated parts of the puzzle, but I think we lost the goal. So now I want to fast forward to about 6 months ago, and unrelated, we've largely decentralized, and we've put platform engineers out into the wild, closer to the product teams. I found myself on this centralized platform cloud tools team thing. And our main goal was to help all the platform engineers in the wild and the developers by reducing developer friction and time to deploy and some other things, mainly through tooling. And so we're like this greenfield team, but we still have some of those puzzle pieces, and we're like, what do we do? We want to provide a ton of value, and up until this point, we're we kind of have a platform, but no one really knows what it is, and we're still shipping software. And, we're a new team. How do we provide value? And this is where the most crucial moment, I think, of our team happened. We really sat down and we said, what if we just document the current state and, not write code? We could have very easily went and built some crazy convoluted 5th process to deploy an API and pitched it on how it's going to solve all the problems, but we took a step back and we said, let's figure out what today's process is and document it. And so, no joke, it was probably a month of writing nothing but Markdown. come in, take this process, how do you deploy a Lambda function, go through it, talk to some developers, write it down, revisit it. But we made it fun. We did some voiceovers, and it wasn't just coming in and writing documentation, because we wanted it to be fun and interactive for our users as well. So now that same question turned into, I'm Bob, how do I deploy my API? And this seemed to be our answer for a lot of things. Hey, have you checked the docs? And this helped us, get our documentation out there for developers to use. It helped them. And when something wasn't on the docs, we could throw that in our backlog and write some documentation around it. And so those same Slack channels and those constant fires started to dwindle down. And things got a little too quiet. And it's actually pretty interesting. We were tracking all the messages we got in a day in a Slack channel, and you can see this trend, which is about the last 6 months, trended heavily down. I don't think documentation is the one and only thing that did this, but I do believe it played a really big role in kind of trending this down. And the cool thing is, a lot of those messages nowadays, we just direct them to a doc site. So why is this powerful? We know that documentation is good, but we still don't always do it. For us, we were able to build really quick value. Writing Markdown and, solidifying our processes was a really quick turnaround to show that our team could, produce value. Rome was not built in a day, and neither were our systems. We have 15 years of tech debt. There's no way we're going to automate ourselves out of that, in just a couple weeks. But putting some documentation around it, alleviated that pressure. Also, as much as we want to build, the perfect, simple system, we just don't. And some of our processes are complex. And so without documentation, the person coming behind you is not going to know, why you made X, Y, or Z decision. And also, we were striving for self-service, and yes, we're still trying to automate a lot of these processes, but documentation proved that a developer can be self-sufficient without end-to-end automation. Another thing that really, helped with writing documentation was, we're sitting behind doing things, and we're not in the lens of a developer. So when you write down documentation in the lens of a developer, you discover how convoluted your processes can be, and how many people someone might need to interact with, how many things are like, yes, we could automate that in 2 days, why don't we go do it? And it almost forms this blueprint of, okay, let's take this thing that takes 2 days and automate pieces until we're fully automated. Another thing that it gives is, when developers or even platform engineers joined 2 years ago, you join, you get those 5 bullet points, and you start doing stuff. You're like, I don't know what to do with my hands. And so now we can say, hey, it's your first day, it's your first week. We got this cool documentation site. Go read about, where do we store our code? What CI provider do we use? Do we use AWS, GCP? And they can even see, some reference architectures that they could deploy. Now, taking this a step further, obviously documentation can get, wrong really fast, and that's almost worse than no documentation. And so we sat down and we figured out for our new team, what's the definition of done? When we ship something, what calls it done? And we introduced 3 things that we do for every feature, process, or thing that we ship. And that's a user guide, so our developers using our products, platforms, processes have a user guide. So they know when we ship something, they're going to have some helpful information. We also have a technical guide. So, I might not be on this team forever, but someone's going to step in behind me, and they can read that technical guide to get up to speed. And the third thing is, in most cases, we ship a contributing guide, so that if someone wants to contribute to that, product or repo, they have some quick start ways to maybe get a local dev environment. And even if no one outside of our team uses that, the next engineer that works on that has a really good, defined way of getting a dev environment, how we do unit tests, integration tests, etc. So I want to end this talk with some, functional tips and tricks on how you might, go from scattered documentation a day or none to having like a doc site up and running. We chose Markdown because it's super flexible and almost anyone can write it. And when you pair that with a static site generator like MakeDocs, there's a ton out there, it will build a searchable, really friendly website, and it's really fast and really easy to get going. We also store all this Markdown in GitHub because we believe that pull requests, even on documentation, will solve errors even in documentation. And so we follow the same software development lifecycle for our documentation. We also have our repo completely open, and I just checked this morning. We've had 26 unique contributors to our documentation. And this really helps with keeping things like links up to date, or maybe you made a typo. Someone going through that documentation can click a few buttons and have a PR waiting for you. Also, in this day and age, we host our site basically for free, and there's a ton of ways you can host it. And the one really interesting thing we do is we installed New Relic on our site, and we can kind of see, what are users looking at? What are users not looking at? Are we trending down? Are we trending up? When we ship a feature, are people looking at our documentation? And so that data is really insightful in prioritizing writing new documentation, removing documentation, and et cetera. Because, documentation can take some time to get right. And lastly, we ask for constant feedback on our documentation. We use something called Hotjar. I'm sure there's a plethora of things out there. And people can say like, hey, I was really mad about this because this was wrong. Or they can actually add like a screenshot in there to say, hey, what if this was better? And we've taken that feedback and we try to get PRs, pretty quick and turn them around. So thanks for listening, and I hope this might inspire you to go write some documentation.